to make sure your testimony, Foresight is a business. It's got science in the name, but it's a business.
Yes, sir.
And business is trying to make money as a business. It's not a nonprofit, right?
It is not a nonprofit. No.
One of the things being a business, it caters to law enforcement. I think I've seen you say that one of your largest influences in the law enforcement industry, right?
Absolutely.
Because that's who your constituents are. That's who you market to.
The answer is, since I came on, that was actually something that was a problem when I first came on in 2018. The perception was we only really were marketing to police. One of my jobs as the Director of Consulting Communications was to expand that. And as a Director of Consulting, I've gone to great lengths to expand it beyond law enforcement to civilian, where a lot of our cases now are civilian cases and a lot of our audience are not police. But you're absolutely correct. Historically, before I came into the company, they had a reputation for really focusing on police training. And it's still a large part of what we do. We haven't expanded as much as we'd like yet, but you're absolutely right. It is still a large part of our audience.
Now, part of that being part of your audience, you yourself has described yourself as a cop with a law degree, right?
Yes.
And you're very proud of that. You want to be a cop.
I love being a cop, yes.
Love being a cop. You said cops are one of the good guys, so that's why you want to be a cop.
Say that again?
Cops are the good guys, so you want to be a cop.
Well, I give them the presumption of regularity, and absolutely, yes.
Sure. Well, that was one of my other questions, because you go on a number of websites. When you start, you give police officers a presumption of regularity, the benefit of the doubt, if you will.
Yeah, so when we start, we give them, especially in a case like this, we give them the presumption of innocence. That's the first thing. And then we give them also a presumption of irregularity, and then we start to look for deviations from that.
But if you start with a presumption of regularity, that's not unbiased, right?
No, I'm not unbiased, and the reason for that is because when we as a community hire our police officers, train our police officers, they get background investigations, they're then trained and put into these conditions, that my starting point just as a community member is that I can give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, in my job, I certainly see a lot of bad examples of policing, and so they can lose that benefit of the doubt. It's theirs to lose. But yeah, just as a community member, I do give police the benefit of the doubt.
Okay. And you also have stated that Force Science has a reputation that there's not a cop out there that you would not defend, right?
Well,
those are your words.
Yeah, since I've been on, that's not our reputation anymore. We do a great job of trying to explain, even in court or at our conferences. My job specifically is to change that narrative since at least 2018, 2019. It's absolutely not true. There are plenty of cops. We don't defend cops, by the way. We just educate juries and evaluators. But there are a lot of police officers whose cases we review that we do not have anything to say that's going to be helpful to their case. And we make sure that the communities know that and that the jurors know that.
Now, part of the thing you put out, you have a website, Force Science website, that you have articles you put up.
Yes, sir.
And you went on that website, you got 3 of the top articles for 2024, your own articles. Do you get to vote on that, or your staff just trying to kiss up to you a little bit?
No, the article selection on top articles are based on the number of readers and how many people push them out. There's no people involved. It's really a statistical analysis of how broadly the reach was on it. So there's no voting on it. Okay. I would vote for my articles, though, in fairness.
Sure. But those articles were, the first one was Homicidal Empathy, an Evolving Threat to Police Officers. That was what you wrote.
Right.
Next one was Officer-Created Jeopardy, a legal theory that threatens effective policing.
Absolutely. The
Expert Trap, protecting police from unreasonable expectations.
Yes, I think that was the Michigan.
So those were all yours. Those were all your articles. Those were what you wrote about, protecting police, threats to police, threatening police, correct?
Yeah, and those concepts
that's
against police officers.
I didn't need that. I just correct. Didn't ask you to explain.
You want to rephrase it? I want to answer them, but go ahead.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't my question. My question was those were the 3 things the 3 articles that were there are all about threatening police, protecting police, how to save police, essentially. Correct?
Essentially, no. So if I can elaborate that, yes, it incorporates police.
Elaborate. This is not your chance to just talk.
Objection, Your Honor.
I ask
He should be able to finish answering his question in the same way that Professor Stone was allowed to answer every single one of Mr. Verbulla's questions as a long narrative. So at least let him finish his answer, please.
He's going beyond my question. I'm asking a simple yes or no question, and he wants to pontificate. So,
essentially, no, is my answer.
Okay, so I didn't rule on the objection. So, I mean, I believe the witness should be allowed to complete his answer, but also not go into
One of the other articles in 2024, maximizing the officer's recollections before the big interview. That was one of the articles that was on Force Science in 2024, correct?
Yes.
Need to look at it? I can show it to you if you want to look at it.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're pulling these from the website?
Correct.
Yeah. This is what year? 2024,
Last
yeah.
year, 2024.
I don't think I wrote that one though, but
You
yes.
did not write this one. But part of this, the big interview is officer-involved shootings. That's what the big interview is talking about, correct?
I would consider that a big interview, yes.
Sure. One of the things they talk about in the article is perhaps the optimal solution is to conduct face-to-face interviews as part of the attorney-client preparation phase, where nothing is generated during the unclean recollection process will be discoverable under the attorney-client privilege. So you're advocating, your article's out there saying police officers should interview their attorneys, go through it once before they do an interview with the fact finder. That's a fair statement?
That's not my article, sir.
Well, but you're the chief communications officer. Buck stops with you, right?
I am the editor, but I do not write every article that goes in
Great.
there.
But aren't you responsible for what goes out on your website? You're saying you're not responsible for stuff like this?
I will not adopt every sentence that an author writes, particularly if I haven't read it. I may very well agree with the statement, but he's only providing me a small snippet, so I'm not gonna tell you that I agree with everything. I don't even wrote that. Was it Geiselman or?
That was Greenman?
Greenman, yeah, so I can't adopt everything Greenman said. Oftentimes when we publish stuff, it's basically for the industry to consider, and they'll decide whether they agree with it or not. We're not endorsing everything we publish. We find it interesting for the audience, and the audience can read it and adopt it if they choose. Much of what goes out I do agree with, but without reading specifically every sentence, I don't know that I agree with everything
Okay.
Dr. Greenman said.
Well, this is another one on your website. It's from 2018, but it's still on your website. Veteran attorney cites 10 ways to lose police lawsuits.
Okay, this is before I worked there.
Before you worked there, but it's still on your website. I mean, you can't distance yourself from something you're the boss of, can you? And just say, I mean, you say you're trying to put good information out for police on your website, right?
Yes,
So, yeah, if you got bad information out there, you probably want to take it down, don't you?
no.
No.
You want me to explain that?
No, not really. So you talked about Lexipol. Lexipol is Bruce Pratt. Bruce Pratt, was that the CEO?
No.
Okay. He was not the former CEO and co-founder of Lexipol.
He was a co-founder of Lexipol, he's an attorney out in California,
Okay.
yes.
But did you know him? Because you said you worked for Lexipol, right?
I know Bruce Pratt, yes.
Okay. So you worked with him?
He did not work for the company, but when I worked there.
All right. And one of the articles in this article, he talks about how to save police from lawsuits, and it's how to clean up injured suspects before photography.
Yes.
Okay? Bloody pictures of suspects injured by police don't help your case in civil court.
Correct. He said that, yes.
He said that, but this is a publication on your website
What
that you're
web-
sending out there.
For science?
Yes. It's, do you not see, is that the FS right there, for science? You
Oh,
take a
from
look
Chuck
at it.
Remsburg, okay. That's Chuck who wrote that.
Okay. It's out there on your website. Focus closely on the actual injury. Get him to smile for the camera if you can. And don't include pictures of bloody gauze. That's on your website about how to handle people who are injured by police in incidents?
It apparently is.
Do
and
you
I-
have a problem with that?
Thank you. In fact, that was the specific issue that Bruce Pratt and I talked about, and I would agree that that's absolutely inappropriate. It was one of the few conversations I had with Bruce Pratt. The reason these things are on our website is because if you look at Force Science News from the beginning of, 2000, whenever it started, there's hundreds of articles there. And one of the things that we do like about it is almost an encyclopedia of looking where police was, what has evolved over time, what has stood the test of time. There are a lot of articles back there that we would look at now and say, yeah, that's not how we do things today, but we maintain that library to show an evolution of policing, and it's very effective for that. So there are a lot of articles that we could sit here all day and I could go, yeah, that's not one I would agree with. I don't think it reflects modern policing. However, we leave those in there because it is an amazing library to look at the history of policing through that time frame.
So you're saying, okay, 2018, veteran attorney cites 10 ways to lose police lawsuits. That was 2018. But in 2024, we have evolving threat to police that you wrote, legal theory that threatens effective policing, and protecting police. So where's the evolution there?
The evolution I'm talking about is a much broader from police practices and legal approaches and how the law changes over time, how technology changes over time. That's the evolution I'm talking about. You're looking at a small snippet of articles that I don't think I wrote and were probably before my time.
The three from 2024, that you wrote those, you admitted those. The last ones I mentioned were your articles. You wrote those, you admitted that.
My articles are great, yes. I'd adopt those.
Okay. Part of this, we've talked about it a little bit before, but Force Science is primarily law enforcement officers who are or former law enforcement officers or actual law enforcement officers that are actually employed as on staff, correct?
I don't know that's, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 of 8 people, or actually more than that, see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The answer to that's no.
Okay, I went on the website, we can pull it up if we need to.
Well, you
You've
did-
got five staff instructors, correct?
Oh, you want staff instructors or
Staff
employees?
instructors, 5, okay, let's go staff instructors. The people are instructing, 5 of you, right?
That sounds right.
Okay. Mr. Lewinsky, now he's
Never-
not law enforcement.
Never police.
Never police, but the other 4 are. You and there's 2 other commanders, the other 4 are former police, correct?
It's likely. We definitely are looking for highly educated former police officers to help educate the population we're interested in, yes.
And then you have 19 partnering instructors. 9 are retired police, and 1 is a lawyer, Laura Scary, and her work was defending police officers in civil and criminal suits. Is that a fair statement?
You'd have to ask her what the bulk of her work is.
You don't know? I mean, you work with her, don't you? I mean, she's listed on the website as a staff instructor.
Yeah, to understand, I don't work with any of these instructors. I mostly teach them, I say I don't work. Nicole Flores and I teach quite a bit. The rest of them are off teaching classes. I'm the director of the consulting division. The classes I teach by myself or maybe with Nicole. Every now and then I might partner with one of them, but I'm not part of what I call off-the-shelf training programs. So who's currently teaching, I'd have to look, and I might be surprised at who our new staff is as well. But if your point is, do we have a lot of former police officers, the answer is yes.
Now, even though Mr. Lewinsky is not a law enforcement officer, he was inducted to the National Law Enforcement Hall of Fame in 2023, wasn't he?
I think it was a lifetime trainer award, yes.
Okay. You just gave a presentation at the National Law Enforcement Hall of Fame induction ceremony, didn't you?
Yes,
That was just a few weeks ago.
it was.
And that was in partnership with Virtra. I heard from, is that how you say it? I can't say that. I've tried to say it.
Virtra?
Virtra.
Yeah.
Okay. That's Lon Bartles. That's his organization.
Lon Bartel,
Lon Bartel.
that's who he works for. He was not part of that training.
All right. But you've trained with him in the past, though, haven't you?
Lon?
Yeah.
Yeah, as often as I can, yes.
As often as you can. How many times have you trained with him in the past?
Taught classes together, maybe
Yeah.
3 or 4.
Okay. Done other presentations, though, with him? I heard about the SHOT Show that you did with him?
That's one of them, yeah. What we try to do with Virtua is bring their simulator in. So we like to get the community into the simulator so that they can experience what police officers are. That's what Virtua does. So we bring them in as often as we can because they've got amazing technology.
So I guess if I understand you correctly, one of the things is the consulting group, you're the head of the consulting group for Force Science, right?
Right.
So one of the things you do, I've seen it on just about every podcast, you kind of give your plug for your podcast. Hey, if you've been involved in an incident, fill out a form, send it into here, we'll talk with you, make sure your attorney's present, and we'll go over your case. That's kind of what you do,
Yeah,
correct?
that's our pre-consult process.
Pre-consult process, and you want to make sure their attorney's present so you don't get subpoenaed, right?
It has nothing to do with the subpoena. It has to do with there is no attorney-client privilege between me and the officer or the civilian who's involved in the incident. So their attorney needs to be present so that they can protect that relationship and the disclosure. Otherwise, essentially they're not able to tell us enough information that we can have an intelligent conversation. So as a protection for the people calling us, we want to make sure they know, hey, when you call us, make sure your attorney's with us. So that way it's a privileged conversation.
So you can't get subpoenaed to whatever they tell you,
Well, I
Right.
could still get subpoenaed, yes.
but you can't tell them anything. You can't tell anything if there's an attorney there, there's attorney-client privilege. If they're not there, you're free to talk to anybody about what happened.
Right. Well, no, that's not true. We still have our own confidentiality. So we will, if there's no attorney-client privilege, we're still going to not disclose the contents. If we are subpoenaed and a judge tells us that we have to disclose it, of course we will. But we still have a professional confidentiality agreement that we're not going to tell people about those cases.
Now, in terms of that consulting, isn't it true that you've said 98% of the cases you see in Force Science are absolutely professionally well-done cases, officers not at fault?
Yeah, they fall within a reasonable range of options, yeah.
So 98% of the time, when somebody calls you, we want to consult with you, 98% of the time, the police officer is correct?
Overwhelmingly, police officers across the country are correct in their decision-making. I don't think you'll find statistics that disagree with that.
That's almost 100% success rate for any profession. That doesn't strike you as a little bit odd?
No.
Okay.
I mean, 98%, I don't have an exact percentage, but I'm
But
telling you,
those
on
were
the
your
cases
words.
we see, right?
But that, I'm just quoting your words. It was on one of your podcasts, remember, Law Enforcement Today, choir practice, some guys, you had a bunch of bourbon in the background, two guys. Those were your words. 98% of the cases we see are absolutely professionally well-done cases. Those are your words.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
What kind of put you on the map was a 2000 article in Police Marksman, why the subject is shot in the back. That was kind of one of your big articles that kind of put you on the map, didn't it?
Not me, no.
Well, okay, you're correct, but Mr. Lewinsky, your founder, that was one of his
Yeah,
big
Bill
research.
wrote that.
Okay, but that was one of that kind of got you on the map, didn't it?
I think the concepts behind it certainly did.
You're aware you're heavily criticized in a number of different courts for science, isn't it?
I'm not.
You're not, but Force Science is. They got a case from Federal District Court in Florida. Force Science is widely regarded as a purveyor of unreliable pseudoscientific analysis engineered to justify officers' use of force. Its studies virtually are all non-peer-reviewed, and none of them have been published in scientific journals.
Yeah, that's absolutely not true, and anybody who tried to present that to a court would be in violation of an ethical duty of candor to the court. I'm sure you've looked and seen that there's over 30 peer-reviewed studies on our website in some of the highest-rated journals in the industries. So whoever advanced that position to the court was essentially lying to the court.
It was a court's opinion. You gotta take a look at it. It was
I don't need to, I've seen it.
He already said it wasn't him, so what's the relevance for this?
That's actually, I'm sorry, go, yes, ma'am.
No, that's fine. We'll move along. You talk about going to universities, Cumberland University, to train kids, train the kids at the universities, correct?
There were kids there. That one was actually open to community and politicians and law enforcement as well as the students.
But you've had, this is always a bad thing, I'm going to bring up Ohio State University in Michigan, but Ohio State canceled trainings because some of the classes where attendees could learn how threatening suspects can be shot in the back by a well-trained officer who made a valid, lawful shooting decision. So Ohio State canceled the presentation there, didn't they?
They did.
You've been criticizing the New York Times and other mainstream media, but you're okay with that because that means you're over the target, doesn't it?
The New York Times article was before I was there, it was 2015. It was basically an opinion piece. The author was given an affidavit to demonstrate that what he was putting in the opinion was incorrect. His response to us was, it doesn't have to be correct, it's an opinion piece. There was a lot of fabrications in the opinion piece. We sort of let it go. And if you want, I had to actually research this because it was well before my time. The New York Times opinion piece was ultimately created by people who oppose us in court. So if we're effective in court in educating juries in a way that's inconsistent with their theory of liability, they're going to write opinion pieces that are unfavorable to us, yes.
And one of the things you do is you use this testimony to go out and then talk to other police officers. You testify in court, and then you give presentations about what happened in court, don't you?
We do. That's a feedback loop, so we can get lessons learned and kind of understand what was important to the jurors or what sort of arguments the opposing sides were making, so we can sort of educate the industry.
So you did talk in Michigan, the Police Officers Association of Michigan, October 10th of 2024. You talked about officer facing 48 years, six others charged, and you talked about your experience in Colorado when you testified for a police officer, correct?
I don't know was that a presentation?
Well, that's what we got. It's a webinar, highly anticipated webinar.
Oh, this was at Caliber Press. That was not in Michigan.
Well, it's to the Police Officer Association of Michigan, though, but
They were Caliber Press is one of the largest police training organizations. They wanted to do a webinar to discuss the facts of the case that they were interested in, and then found out we were involved with, and so they hosted a webinar. It looks like they were advertising that webinar.
but you talked at it.
I was on that.
You were
I was
on it. You were the star person. It's Vaughn and Jim will dive. Jim Glennon. Vaughn and Jim will dive deep into the tactical and legal implications of the case. So you talked about it. You went to the police on a webinar and spoke about it, right?
Yeah, this was a high-profile national case where Caliber Press
Don't-
itself didn't understand the facts of the case, so they brought in somebody who was familiar with the facts. I got permission from the defense team to discuss the case as part of educating the community on what actually occurred in that case, because the media and the facts that were being distributed looked nothing like the reality that the officers were experiencing. And so that was one of the mechanisms by which we could educate the community on the reality of that particular incident.
It's also one of the ways you can kind of promote force science, right?
Yeah, everything we do that has Force Science's name behind it is a promotion for sure.
Well, not only that, but when you go, just about every time I've watched your podcast, one of the plugs is after you say we're consulting, you advertise, hey, come get certified as a force science analysis, don't you?
I don't know that I do that enough, actually. My marketing guys tell me, hey, don't forget to tell people about our training classes. So oftentimes when I do a lot of public speaking, I try to remember to give those advertisements, those plugs for the training that's going on. We think we have a very good product that's important to the community and to the attorneys, and we want to make sure they're aware that those products exist so that they can take advantage of them.
And at $1,600 a person, that's one of the ways you pay your bills as a business, isn't it?
Yes, and that's incredibly low. It's a week-long class. It's a good investment for the individual officers for sure, but it's actually probably worth quite a bit more than that.
And in terms of that, how many of those trainings do you do a year then?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I don't know.
Going into those trainings, I did find an article about somebody was saying how wonderful your training was. It was on force science, but you had Laura Scary, an expert in police litigation and management. Her expertise reflected insights that can only come from representing over 100 police officers in moments immediately following their critical incidents. Why do you need a labor attorney representing something that's force science that's supposed to be teaching about, psychological behavior, psychological factors, behavior, and memory?
Yeah, so Laura Scary is an operational attorney as well. So when an officer is involved in a critical incident, she's the attorney who actually shows up to the scene. And so she's very familiar with the human performance issues in the immediate aftermath of shootings, and also the legal issues. So what she's trying to do when we're teaching investigators and those who evaluate cases, what they can expect, a lot of people have never done these before, what they can expect in the immediate aftermath of a shooting, particularly in relation to the officers that were involved. Laura Scary is an incredible resource for that purpose.
You're not a big fan of progressive police reform, are you?
I mean, there's some aspects of progressive police reform that I think are fantastic, and there are some that I think are either beyond human performance capability, or they just reflect a very different priority than traditional law and order interests.
Okay. This is one of the articles you wrote on that, isn't it? 2021, progressive police reform.
Yes.
Okay. In this article that you wrote, you really don't like body cameras, do you?
I think body cameras are amazing tools.
You wrote, if you believe that police are racist, abusive, and corrupt, then it makes sense to mandate body cameras and enact policies that prevent pretext car stops, restrict consent searches, and limit investigatory stops. That doesn't sound like it's an amazing tool to me if you think the way you're mandating them is because their police are racist, abusive, and corrupt.
Will you read that again? I don't know
Sure.
what you're talking about, the body cam. You can just read it, that's fine.
I want to make sure. Go ahead. You read it. Top paragraph highlighted.
I think you need to read the entire article. In fact, I would encourage you to.
I've read the entire article, but that's your line you wrote. It makes, if you believe that police are racist, abusive, and corrupt, then it makes sense to mandate body cameras. That's your sentence you wrote. Correct?
I wrote that.
Okay. You also wrote that if you believe that police profession is illegitimate and untrustworthy, then it makes sense to construct and empower layers of civilian oversight. So you don't like civilian oversight of police, do you?
No, I do like, well, civilian oversight, yeah, I do like civilian oversight, political oversight of the police. Would you like me to read the entire article? It'd be great.
No, not really.
I
'Cause
suspect not.
we just need that one sentence. I mean, I don't know how you can put it in a better context, but no.
Have me read it and it'll be a better
Sure.
context.
Well, you're okay with civilian oversight of police? you said.
Yes, I think civilian oversight, one of the things we learned about civilian oversight, there was a risk, or there was a belief that when you bring civilians in to evaluate police, the first thing you have to do is get them to see the world through the lens of the police officer. And so that required training. It required them to actually go through what police officers go through the simulators, and to understand the law, and then we put them in a sim to understand the reality of it so they could feel it. Then they could actually engage in honest accountability. Civilian oversight, people got nervous because they thought civilians were gonna be harder on the police. What had ended up happening is civilian oversight actually was a lot more liberal with police performance than their actual police officers were. And so any concerns about civilian oversight really came down to, are the civilians who are conducting oversight doing it through the lens of a reasonable officer, or are they coming in to conduct civilian oversight and actually intentionally not allowing the officer's view? Civilian oversight in the progressive reform area, there were some examples of it where they would say, if you want to belong to the civilian oversight board, you cannot have been a former police officer, you cannot be related to a police officer, and you could not have gone through specialized training for police officers. And so when we started to see that, we would push back on that kind of reform effort, because it was actually having people, civilians, evaluate police without actually doing it through the lens of the officer, which was what the law required. So these are debates that are happening across the country. So to ask, do I like them? My answer would have to be, well, which one?
Well, you made sure that when you have a son that's a police officer, correct?
Well, to me,
Justin, Your Honor, relevance?
It goes right to his statement about, so I got a quote regarding civilian police.
His
You
son?
can do the quote, but ask him about his son. I don't think.
That's
Well,
not
it
relevant.
pertains to his son. You select,
I'll sustain that objection.
your comment, you selected a department where politics hadn't infected the agency or civilian leaders for him. Isn't that true?
I think she sustained the objection.
Well, I read the quote. She said,
I appreciate that. Different questions.
well, it's a different question. The quote is, you made sure that politics hadn't infected the agency or civilian leaders where your son became a police officer, right?
Objection, Your Honor. This is the same topic, so.
What?
It's the same topic, but.
About his son,
that
how is
wasn't
his
the
son
question.
relevant?
So, you asked a question, she objected, I sustained the objection, you asked another
I
question.
rephrased it.
About his
And
son.
then he said, oh, you sustained, but he didn't mention son the second time. Then the third question, now here's the son again, so.
Well, this goes
You
to,
can ask the second question again, and then you can bootstrap that to make it relevant, but
Well,
whether or not his son is a police officer, I think it's beyond.
correct. But
Because there is an
the thing is where he goes, why he chose where his son went. And that's what his quote was, that civilian review boards where civilians hadn't been infected.
Right, so the second way that you phrased the question was fine.
Okay. So you made sure that politics hadn't infected the agency or civilian leaders, correct?
Yes.
You have a problem with prosecutors who try and hold police officers accountable, don't you?
No.
No. Do you remember talking in once again, Betsy Brainer Smith? I think that's how you say her name, nationalpolice.org, NPA?
Yes.
Do you remember telling her you have a problem with prosecutors who charge police officers where you lost the gatekeepers? Progressive reform activists trying to hold officers accountable are doing it unjustly if they don't know what they're doing, or corruptly if they do. That was your quote. Do you remember that?
That's absolutely true, yes.
So that's So I'm a progressive reform activist prosecutor.
You asked me if you are? I don't
Yeah.
know you, sir.
It's your mission right now to be here, right? You're the tip of the spear. You said that before, haven't you?
When I talk about tips, I'm talking about a consulting division, because what we do is we're going around and we're training a lot of investigators and evaluators on the types of issues to look for, the human performance issues that impact perception and cognition. And then what we do in the consultant division is we actually take all of that to real world cases. So when I talk about the tip of the spear, I'm talking about if our arguments aren't persuasive in court and they're not persuasive in agencies, then we have to do a feedback and go back to the trainers and say, look, these arguments aren't working, these things are not, we're not being persuasive in these areas.
Okay. Do you remember Eric Hine Academy? A guy from, I think he's from Holland. You talked on a podcast with him?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall saying, my personal mission right now is to ensure those officers who are having juries, legislatures, their own chiefs, administrators, and prosecutors indict them in a court of public opinion and criminal cases without any knowledge of human performance. I want to be there with them. My job is to be there in that courtroom. That's what you said.
Right, so what we're saying, like we talked about earlier, like honest accountability versus corrupt or unjust accountability. The two standards are, if a prosecutor is trying to hold an officer accountable to a standard that is vague, uncertain, and the officer's never heard about, then that would be a standard by which an officer could not predict the lawfulness of their own performance. That would be unjust or corrupt accountability. If a prosecutor is attempting to hold an officer accountable to a standard that is beyond human performance capability, that no human could do, then that is also another example of what I said is, if they do it unknowingly, just because they don't have an understanding of human performance, then that's unjust. If they do it intentionally, then that's corrupt. My job and our job is to ensure that the triers of fact understand the reality of human performance in critical incidents, so that we have honest accountability, not unjust or corrupt accountability. So we are 100% committed to honest accountability of police officers, and that is part of our mission statement.
Going to your actual report, one of the things you talk about, you kind of very similar to Professor Stoughton. You talk about when you look at a use of force event, there's got to be intent, means, ability, and opportunity. That's how you phrase it.
Correct.
All right. And intent means somebody wants to do it, right?
They're willing to, yeah.
Willing to. Means they have a weapon system.
Right.
As I think you said it. Ability means physically upright and mobile. And opportunity is a position where the weapon system could actually reach you. That's
Right.
how you phrased it in one of your podcasts. You don't like, in terms of determining that, you don't like the American Law Institute, new standards where they talk about necessary. Officers struggle to understand necessary, proportional, and minimum force standards, right?
Right.
Okay. But one of the things you did in this case is you said Patrick had intent because he had disproportionate resistance, right? That was your statement, right? Disproportionate resistance. Patrick engaged in disproportionate resistance, ergo, the officer could assume he was going to use the taser on him.
Yeah, so when an officer's evaluating a suspect's conduct, remember, it's based on training, education, experience, and reasonable inferences. I think the statement that he's making is when the officer sees somebody who is resisting at a level that is disproportionate to the suspected offense, that it is reasonable for that officer to believe that there's much more going on, and they have to prepare themselves for the fact that there might be warrants, there might be weapons, there might be undiscovered crimes. And so is it reasonable for an officer to believe when someone is fighting you, you think you pull them over for a turn signal violation, and they're fighting you at this level of aggressiveness, for example, that it's reasonable for an officer to infer there's something more serious going on that this guy's aware of that they've yet to figure out.
But that's what I'm saying. But the officer, you don't like proportional use of force. So you can use it against the victim, Patrick, because he's disproportionately resisting, but an officer, proportional level of force, they don't know how to use that. That's crazy. How do you expect them to do that? That's your position, right?
No.
No. Well, as you said, officers struggle to understand necessary, proportional, and minimum force standards.
Right, so these are not standards that are typically involved in constitutional policing. These are not standards that officers are trained against when you talk about. In fact, Stoughton and his academic colleagues have written articles to try to incorporate these standards because the current standard doesn't. So they're advocating that necessity and proportionality and minimum force necessary. So if you imagine for a second, again, it is beyond human performance capabilities for a human to look at another human and know what is the minimum force necessary to arrest this person and overcome resistance that they've never felt. And yet we'll see that language sort of incorporated because it sounds great, right? But we wouldn't ask a firefighter to put out a fire with minimum water necessary. We don't ask wrestlers to pin somebody with minimum force or football players to tackle with minimum force, because a human cannot possibly know what that is in advance. So this was the argument I was making and trying to point out, that these vague standards that have not evolved through case law, officers don't know what they mean. And so we have these conversations. These are the academic debates we spend an awful lot of time. So, welcome to the debate. These are things that are not well settled. These are things that academics want to have to wrestle with, and they're wrestling with them in courts as we speak.
And so you don't like them. That was my point. You don't like minimum standards. You don't like proportional use of force, right? You don't like putting that standard on an officer.
I don't like any vague standard that doesn't allow an officer to predict the lawfulness of their own behavior. So if you tell an officer you can only use minimum force, and they would call me when these new standards for, again, a lot of the progressive reform efforts were coming after, they were coming fast. And so agencies would call and say, hey, we got this new policy, officers have to use minimum force or use only force that's proportional. What does that mean? And we would say, that has not been decided yet. We don't know. And so until those things are fleshed out, either defined in terms, this is what we discussed in Bakersfield with the ACLU, they were using terms that police officers had never heard before. And so, and I got them to agree that we cannot have standards that don't allow officers to predict the lawfulness of their own behavior. They're like, of course not. That's a due process violation. It's absence of notice sort of thing. If the officer doesn't know what's illegal, we can't hold them accountable for violating it. And so my objection was, when we start adding all these new terms, and I've got a slide with like 15 different terms I've seen, officers don't know what to do with them. So that's what I was pushing back against. But in my academic capacity, those are just discussions we're having until those things get fleshed out more, either in courts or through legislation.
But it's okay for an officer to determine disproportionate resistance from a person.
Absolutely, yes.
One of the other things you said, the basis for why this was justified is that you even talked about it to the jury, MMA, right? You said, in real-world combat sports and law enforcement experience confirms that suspects can turn explosively from the prone position. In wrestling and mixed martial arts, MMA, fighters routinely explode from a prone position to reverse control over their opponent.
Yes.
Okay. So you're comparing Patrick to an MMA fighter. You get to react like that.
I've seen that in jiu-jitsu, not just MMA, with brand new kids who've never been trained before, or adults who've never been trained. It's a human I'm comparing to another human.
So even though MMA fighters go through 3 hours of training every day, 2 hours a day, or 6 hours a day, that's a very different thing than Patrick, who's an African immigrant with his pants falling down and barefoot out on a grassy front yard, right?
Yeah, completely unrelated, yes.
One of the other things you talked about was his superhuman resistance. That was your words in the report, right?
Yes, I think I used the word superhuman as what it was perceived to feel like, because all of the efforts that the officer was putting into it was unable to overcome the resistance. So what that's often is like, it feels like it's superhuman resistance. Superhuman, it's not a legal term of art. It's a lot of resistance.
So you're taking that inferences from his statement, that suspect's superhuman resistance.
Yeah, it's a characterization of the level of resistance an officer in that position might have characterized it as.
So what Patrick did was beyond human, having a higher nature or greater powers than humans have. That's what you saw in the video?
If you're gonna read that word literally, I suppose that's what the dictionary would say. That was not how I intended it,
You're
certainly.
a lawyer, right?
I am.
Lawyers use words, right?
We do.
And so words have meaning, right?
They do.
So you put in a report that a guy who stood up and walked across a yard was superhuman, right?
Well, the characterization of that force would feel like that.
He didn't have superhuman speed, though, did he? Because clearly he got caught.
He did not have superhuman speed.
But just superhuman strength to be able to stand up, right?
The literal definition of superhuman, I suppose if I go back and rewrite it based on this cross, I would use a different word just to avoid this, but the concept's the same, which is when you're trying everything you can to overcome the resistance, and this guy's standing up, you're an adult male, and another adult is standing up with you repeatedly, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I use the concept of, it would feel like almost like superhuman strength in that moment. Like, this is not consistent with my understanding of past practices on trying to control a human. But yes, the word superhuman was probably not the best choice of words.
Your Honor, I got maybe a few more, I don't know if you want to stop now, I think I could wrap up here relatively within the next 5.
Minute left.
Well, I can stop there, I don't want to get into a minute, so I can wait till Monday.